Welcome everybody to What Would It Cost Florida with your host Niels Decker and our special guest Julian from Real Property Management Coral. We're going to be talking numbers today. He knows his numbers. I'm excited to talk about all things around property management, cap rates. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I guess my background's in construction, but I always kind of had that entrepreneurial drive. I went to school, I studied business at Seneca College, and in the summers I would work with my family's renovation company. And from there I kind of had that exposure to the value of investing in real estate and owning rental properties. So it kind of what inspired me to want to invest and get into owning rental properties myself. So from there, I just wanted to make money and be able to afford some properties. So I kind of went the trade routes, and I worked in a number of different trades, from concrete forming as a foreman to a drywall taper. Did that for a few years as well. And along the way, kind of started investing and building my portfolio with properties. So that kind of what led me to January of last year. I was looking to expand my portfolio to Florida. I mean, Florida was obviously a very hot destination and a hot topic and ton of interest here. So I said, hey, there's a little bit of familiarity as well. I've recently been here in 2018, kind of fell in love with it then. Never thought in a million years I'd move down here or have a business here, but it was always a dream. So yeah, I didn't really have any goals or objectives when I first came down here. I just kind of wanted to look into investment properties and even just properties for myself to use. So just came down here on a whim and just started investigating. And almost immediately I saw the value in real estate. Pretty much for the price of a single family home in Innisfil, you can buy a beautiful 2,000 square foot bungalow minutes from the beach here. Yeah. So I felt like your dollar could kind of do a little bit more for you here. It's a little bit worth your dollar a little bit more, right?
And for the listeners, Innisfil, Ontario, you're Canadian, yeah.
Yeah.
And now your visit to Florida and your experience here, yeah.
Yeah. So again, and also simultaneously, I realized how expensive it was to rent. I was kind of bouncing around a couple different places between hotels and eventually landing in an Airbnb for a month. The month of February cost me about $7,000 for a small studio apartment in Oakland Park, just north of Fort Lauderdale. So that kind of piqued my interest as well. And I started, looking at properties in a different light as more investments and, just started crunching the numbers, calculating cap rates and NOIs. And I just got really excited about the numbers and the opportunities. And I'm the type of person when I get excited, I just want to share with the whole world and I want everybody to get in on the action with me. So I guess that's what inspired me to start a business out of it down here.
Very cool. And there's just a lot of cool stuff that I want to dive into, but I want to back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And how interesting that is that when you're bringing in your construction background and maybe talk a bit about the evolution of what you saw in the flip and buy world and construction side of things in Ontario and maybe even what you've experienced here and what does that look now for, let's say, the listener that's a micro flipper. How does that all look back home and the difference here in Florida?
So that's a great question. Another thing I also noticed immediate value in was in the flips down here. Yeah. It is very difficult to kind of coordinate trades and find quality tradespeople to do the work. So there's a value in just that coordination. Being able to put all the pieces together and be able to deliver a turnkey property. There's a value to that. And I see a lot of micro flippers down here, just buying these condos for $100,000, putting 20, 30 grand into them, listing them for $180,000, just things like that, right? It's very common here. It's also, I feel in general, it's a lot safer for those types of investments down here because, you always have the option to rent the property. You don't necessarily have to flip it. You could hold it, rent it. There's more security in that, especially in, kind of the macroeconomic conditions that we're in now with the raising interest rates. There's no rent control down here. So you're able to kind of raise the rents as interest rates rise so that you're able to cover your costs at least, if not produce a cash flow. Yeah. So I think there's a lot more security down here in doing projects like that.
Very interesting. So talk a little bit more, in Ontario, landlords can be a little bit less of a driver's seat. Everything's got its pros and cons, and here how he's saying there's less rent control. So for that microfiber listing, speak more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally Florida is much more business conducive as a whole. Legislation has made that kind of possible. So basically, down in Florida, it's very pro landlord. It's kind of easier to evict people if they're not paying rent. You post a 3-day notice if they don't pay rent, and if that doesn't work, you get the local sheriff over there. It's very different, than Toronto is.
Yeah, and I think obviously you got a big role of they're protecting tenants down there because of the weather and getting people outside. So different landscapes and different rules. Perhaps that for those reasons, who knows how that all evolved, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of factors that kind of set Florida apart and make it a unique market.
Yeah.
The two kind of static factors that drive people to Florida, the beach and the weather. That's not really changing anytime soon. So, you have the strong short-term rental market, which also lends itself to the long-term rental market as well. People think kind of, you have to Airbnb the property to be profitable on it, but that's really not the case. Even locking something up with a long-term tenant is also very profitable and has very good returns and cap.
And to that point, also a lot of areas that are not going to allow Airbnb, and that you'll still get a great return from long term.
Yeah, that's also a very common thing I deal with. A lot of clients, they kind of want that flexibility of kind of using the property for self-use and being able to make some money on it as well. That's a little bit more difficult because then you need to get into the short-term rentals, and if depending your price point, if you're in a lower price point and just kind of it's a second home for you, you kind of need to spend a little bit more to gain that flexibility. A lot of condos have restrictions, and a lot of HOAs, they have restrictions on short-term rentals. But I can assure you that they're not changing the laws for like the non-HOA anytime soon. They've tried. A lot of neighborhoods have tried to kind of implement an HOA after the fact, and they actually can't do that. So
yeah,
it's kind of wide open for investments here.
Yeah, and I think too they've recognized that it's become such a thing on the masses that you have to come up with the times as well and not shut down something completely and find sort of a happy medium. And overall, Florida has done that amazing on so many fronts. And with
yeah, exactly, because when you think about like a lot of the economy relies on tourism and the hotel industry. So you have that Airbnb tax that you have to pay. It's like a lodging tax, and that kind of goes keep things a little bit even playing ground, right? So the hotels aren't really hurting too much from the influx of Airbnb and short-term rentals. Some areas, they'll outright restrict it, but like I said, with the single-family home, something more freehold, there's nothing really that they can do to restrict you from any type of use you want to get out of it.
Yeah, and are there some minimums as well on how long you can do your Airbnbs throughout the year? I think back in Toronto, as an example, I think it's now 167 days for primary residence. What does that all look like?
Yeah, they don't really have any restrictions like that in Fort Lauderdale. Like Boca Raton, if you get up over there, I mean, like there's no short-term rentals allowed. I think the minimum lease is about 6 months. So there, it's not really a short-term rental friendly area. Rightfully so, the demographic there, they probably wouldn't be too kind to short-term rentals or visitors. But Fort Lauderdale is very pro-business, and they're kind of open for that type of venture.
Yeah, and emphasizing how important it is to really, with yourself being able to do real estate or partners that you work with, and for us too, for realtors, really to have the know-all of what areas are going to be conducive to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anywhere near the beach is typically going to bring in a good short-term rental return. But you're seeing even a little bit further out west, even those properties are doing pretty well, a little bit closer to the Panther, where the Panthers play, and Sawgrass Mills. I see a lot of people coming down, and those properties are actually doing quite well as well. So, it's kind of wide open. It's just kind of finding the right spot, and it depends the use that you want to get out of it and how you're going to tailor that experience to people vacationing here. That'll depend where you really want to be ultimately. And also price point is a big part of that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the big juicy one that you threw out there is speaking for the listeners wondering about cap rates and what that all looks like, and what we're used to back home and the lack of number of percentages that are back home in Canada. What does that look like? And if you want to speak on different areas, if it's the Miami-Dade or Broward or West Palm or even some on the West Coast, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, cap rates, it really depends. There's a lot of factors, right, on what your intended use is, if you're going to short-term rental or long-term lease it. Also, the down payment, significantly decides your cash flow and all that. Also, interest rates is a big factor. But typically, anything I run the numbers on is like a 6 cap or higher. That's even including the management fees built in. So, I mean, it's pretty appealing, especially.
And that's your bottom starting point.
Yeah. You're seeing a lot of properties like that. You can do really well. And, like I said, I got really excited when I kind of saw those numbers just on a regular single family home. You're not even in the multifamily space yet, just with a single family home.
The luxury end. If we're calling that the conservative bottom, what are we calling more of the higher end?
Oh, yeah. You can see like cap rates of 10 plus, when you're Airbnb like a luxury home and you're really tailoring the experience to be conducive to short-term rentals and provide an experience. You're seeing really good returns on those properties. And the thing is too, I mean, over the last 2 years, everyone kind of wanted to get into the business of Airbnb and short-term rentals. So you did see a little bit of saturation. But mainly that was kind of just affecting the lower end, like one-bedroom apartments, kind of the fly-by-nighters and kind of the guys trying to operate them themselves. But kind of that middle tier is still performing really well. The $750,000 US to 1.2 is really performing right now. I mean, the high-end luxury, $3-4 million properties, it's taken a little bit of a hit, just because the rest of the world is open now, and everyone's you could travel to Europe, and things are open, but still like doing really, really well, especially relative to other places in the world where you would want to own investment properties.
Yeah, very cool. And I think too, one of the big things that some people might know that are foreign to Florida is that you actually have to have a property management in place if this is an investment property versus maybe a family member or a neighbor taking care. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, you're able to self-manage if it's your own property. There is like a few different ways around it. But if you're Airbnb, you actually need to have a license. You need to be licensed with the state. You need to be licensed with the county, even stuff like the city as well. So there's a couple licenses that you need to get to be able to short-term rent the unit out, right? It's easily something that could kind of run amok and go wild if it's not regulated. They've done a pretty good job though of implementing some regulations, but also keeping it very pro-business and conducive.
Cool, very cool. And I think what are some of the things that you're now coming up as well when you're dealing with, say, foreigners that are coming to look to get a property management in place? What are some of the common conversations that you're having where you're perhaps throwing out some educational that those who are listening and then wondering about property management, what would you say to them?
I think the biggest thing that surprises investors from Canada is the fact that you can be profitable and cash flow positive on a long-term lease.
Neutral.
Yeah, and you're not bleeding out, especially in the climate of the rising interest rates. It actually impresses people that even on a long-term lease, kind of peace of mind, not having the turnover of an Airbnb, that it's still a very profitable investment.
Cool. Yeah, and I know you're great with your numbers and having that on your side and being able to run that through for people. That's awesome. So, So talk a little bit about some challenges that you face, if that's with the actual clients or if it's with other professionals or realtors that you work with.
Yeah, so one of the common challenges we face is really justifying the value that we could bring to the client or the investor. I think a lot of realtors could kind of relate to this. They think they could kind of list their property themselves, same way they think they could manage the property themselves. They see that 10% management fee and it's kind of a big number, scary number to them. So they think, hey, I can make another 10% by managing it myself. And, oftentimes they're spending a lot more than the 10% in some of the mistakes they made. One of the common things is first off, they're not really able to professionally market the property, right? So that's going to lead to staying on the market and leading to greater vacancies. Also, they have that emotional attachment with their property, and they think it's the best on the block, and they can get X amount of dollars more than Bob down the street, and that also leads to remaining on the market a little bit longer than it should. And it's almost like a chain reaction from there. They get a little bit desperate, and they're going to take the first tenant application that they get. Right, and that could open up a whole other can of worms, right? Evictions are very expensive to deal with as well. So, my company, we actually guarantee that the property is rented within 29 days or less, right? So that's very valuable, because you think about it, 1 month's rent is 8.3% of your gross annual revenue. So if that property's sitting, an extra month on the market, right there, you're paying another 8.3% out of your pocket. And you also still have all the responsibility and the duties involved with being a full-time property manager.
Yeah, that's huge. And, I think that too will paint the picture of what it all can look at, and presenting that throughout. You're looking at it in a 12-month period, and I love how you broke it down. Your 8.3% of what you're doing in that period, that block of period. Very cool. So for the listeners, what would it cost for your services, or some of the things that you have set for your company?
Yeah, so I guess my answer would be it pays for itself. Yeah. Really, because as I mentioned, some of the costs that you could incur just by making a simple mistake by self-managing could cost you a lot more than the 10% fee that we charge. And, long-term leases anywhere between 8 and 12%. There's other kind of fees associated with leasing and tenant placement and stuff like that. But typically 8 to 12% on a long-term lease, and anywhere between 15 and 25% on a short-term lease. So the answer, I guess, is it pays for itself, because kind of avoid some costly mistakes, and that 10% that you're paying in management fees is recouped by getting a very marketable property, identifying the right rent that it should be listed at, and also finding and screening the proper tenant. Not only tenant, but also screening the proper pets. 72% of households own pets down here, and it's something that's often overlooked by people is a pet could come in there and do more damage than any tenant could. So we actually have processes where we actually screen the pets as well, and we associate a FIDO score with them rather than FICO.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So the pets, we're gonna start asking questions. What's that FIDO score?
They have their whole, they have a whole profile, a whole history on the pets, and it's actually a popular service now.
Oh, 1 second.
I'm so sorry.
We're gonna be start saying, what's the pet FIDO? That's the FIDO score it's called.
Yeah, FIDO score. Yeah,
very cool. Awesome, and and to reiterate what you're saying is it pays for itself, and those conservative cap rates of 6% on your sub million prices, and for property prices, and we're not even talking about plus million and into the luxury market here. It's a whole different ball game down here, and again, at home we're talking about either losing some or staying cash positive or cash neutral, versus now here at cash positive.
It's funny, the change in mentality. You almost have to reprogram and indoctrinate them in a good way to think more like Florida. Don't think of if you're breaking even, that's a good investment. You want to be cash flow positive here, and it's definitely within the realm of possibilities for sure.
Yeah, awesome, man. So cool, wicked insights. I love numbers too, so it's great to hear that. Awesome for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And everyone at home, thank you for listening. This was What Would It Cost Florida. Until the next one.